It was a quiet night at the hospital. The emergency lights cast a dim glow on the sterile walls, creating an atmosphere of eerie stillness. Nurses and doctors working the night shift exchanged hushed conversations, their voices blending with the occasional echo of footsteps in the empty corridors. Tonight seemed uneventful, until the automatic doors at the main entrance slowly slid open. Everyone assumed it was a late-night patient, perhaps someone seeking urgent care. But instead, a lone figure emerged from the darkness. A German shepherd. His coat was matted with dry mud, his deep, intelligent eyes reflecting exhaustion and determination. He moved cautiously yet purposefully, carrying something in his jaws, a small bundle wrapped in an old, tattered cloth. The nurses exchanged stunned glances, their breath catching in their throats. One hesitated but then stepped forward, curiosity overpowering fear. Carefully, with trembling hands, she unwrapped the cloth. Then, a collective gasp filled the room. Inside was a baby, tiny, frail, barely breathing. Its pale skin was cold to the touch, its delicate chest rising and falling in weak, uneven intervals. "Oh my God, it's a baby," a nurse whispered, her voice trembling with shock. The silence shattered. In an instant, the emergency room burst into action. Nurses and doctors sprang to life, their hurried footsteps echoing through the halls. Equipment was wheeled in, oxygen prepared, IV lines readied, every second ticking away like an urgent countdown. No one could believe what they were seeing. A dog, this dog, had walked into the hospital, carrying a newborn on the brink of death. Yet Max, the retired police K9, stood motionless by the entrance, silent, unwavering. His gaze locked on the infant, as if pleading for help. He showed no fear, no distress, only an unshakable determination. "Check his breathing and heart rate now," a doctor commanded, snapping the team into focus. A nurse knelt beside the bundle, her hands trembling as she gently unwrapped it further. The baby's tiny body was covered in dirt, its skin icy cold. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished," the lead doctor said grimly. "We need an IV, immediately." The heart monitor emitted slow, weak beeps, a haunting reminder of how little time remained. A nurse quickly connected the baby to an oxygen supply, adjusting the flow with precision. The entire room fell into a tense, focused silence, the weight of the moment pressing on every soul present. And yet, through it all, Max did not move. He remained by the door, watching, waiting. His deep brown eyes filled with something unspoken, hope, trust, and perhaps, just perhaps, the knowledge that he had done what no one else could. He had saved a life. The urgency in Max's eyes was almost human, an unspoken plea that none of them could quite explain. "This is so strange. How did he know to bring the baby here?" a nurse murmured under her breath, her voice laced with awe and disbelief. No one had an answer. All they knew was that Max had acted as if this was the most important mission of his life. The doctors worked tirelessly, their movements precise and urgent. One nurse carefully adjusted the baby's oxygen levels, while another monitored his body temperature. "He's still weak," someone reported in a hushed voice, "but his vitals are starting to stabilize." A subtle shift rippled through the room, relief, cautious but present. The baby was still in critical condition, but thanks to Max, he now had a fighting chance. Max, though clearly exhausted, never took his eyes off the infant. He remained by the entrance, motionless yet alert, as though his duty wasn't over just yet. For a brief moment, the room fell into a profound silence. The weight of what had just occurred settled in, leaving everyone speechless. A dog, an animal, had done something extraordinary, something beyond logic. Word of the unbelievable incident spread quickly through the hospital. Within minutes, the police were called to the scene. Officer Daniels, the lead investigator, arrived with his team. As they stepped into the emergency room, the nurses, still visibly shaken, hurried to recount the surreal event. "We have no idea where the dog came from," the head nurse explained, her voice slightly trembling. "He just walked in, carrying the baby, placed him on the floor, and stood there. That's all we know." Officer Daniels narrowed his eyes, his gaze shifting toward Max, who remained near the entrance. The dog's posture was calm yet alert, his watchful eyes tracking every movement in the room. "A dog carried a baby to the hospital?" Daniels muttered under his breath. It sounded impossible. Yet, as he locked eyes with Max, something in the dog's steady gaze made him hesitate. This wasn't just any dog. There was intelligence behind those eyes, determination, purpose. "Has anyone checked for a microchip?" Daniels finally asked. A young officer stepped forward with a scanner, his fingers tightening around the device as he approached the silent hero. The young officer cautiously approached Max, scanner in hand, but as soon as he got too close, Max backed away. His posture was tense, not aggressive, but clearly issuing a silent warning: "Do not come any nearer." "This dog's been trained," the officer murmured. "He might be a retired K9. Daniels nodded, studying Max carefully. He took a slow step forward, keeping his movements calm and unthreatening. "Easy there, buddy," he said softly. Max held his gaze for a moment, then, as if making a calculated decision, he allowed Daniels to clip a leash onto his worn collar. "Let's see where he came from," Daniels instructed, signaling his team to follow. Without hesitation, Max began to walk. His steps were steady, deliberate. He knew exactly where he was going. The officers trailed behind, their patrol car lights flickering against the dark streets, casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. They moved in silence, the tension thickening with every passing block. "Where's he taking us?" one officer whispered. Finally, Max came to a stop. They stood before an old, dilapidated house in a desolate part of town. The front door hung ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze, as if someone had left in a hurry. Daniels frowned. "This is it," he said quietly. The officers exchanged wary glances before cautiously approaching the entrance. As they stepped inside, a wave of decay hit them: mold, stale air, and rotting food. The house was suffocatingly silent, yet it felt like it held echoes of something dark. Max led them through a cluttered living room filled with overturned furniture and dust-covered belongings, his pace slowing as they neared a small door at the back of the house. Daniels signaled his team, his voice low and tense. "Stay sharp." One of the officers pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, almost suffocating in its stillness. In one corner stood an old, dusty crib. Around it, scattered signs of recent use: a tattered blanket, a few children's toys, an empty dog food bowl. The sight sent a chill down Daniels's spine. Max moved forward and sniffed the crib, his nose lingering over the spot where the baby had once lain. "The baby was here," an officer whispered, his expression hardening as he took in the scene. Then, as if his duty was finally done, Max let out a heavy breath and collapsed beside the crib, his body going limp with exhaustion. For the first time, he allowed himself to rest. His mission was complete. The officers fanned out, their flashlights slicing through the layers of dust and neglect. Every step on the wooden floor sent an eerie groan through the house. It was clear whoever had been here had left in a hurry. But why? And more importantly, who? The dining table was cluttered with crumpled papers, as if someone had left in a hurry. "Looks like whoever lived here didn't have time to pack," an officer muttered, flipping through the scattered documents. Meanwhile, another officer explored the kitchen. The sink overflowed with dirty dishes, and a faint odor of rotting food lingered in the air. On the counter, something caught his eye: a crumpled envelope, partially buried beneath discarded mail. Curious, he picked it up, carefully unfolding the worn paper inside. The handwriting was shaky, each word uneven, as if written under extreme distress. "There's a letter here," he announced. Then, in a steady voice, he began to read aloud. I no longer have the strength to care for him. Everything around me is falling apart. All I have left is Max, and I know he'll do the right thing. I hope that one day, someone will forgive me. A heavy silence followed as the final words echoed through the empty house. The letter wasn't signed, but its meaning was painfully clear. Someone, a mother, broken and desperate, had placed her last shred of hope in her most loyal companion. Maximum. The German shepherd had been watching over the baby all this time, fulfilling his duty even when his owner could no longer go on. One officer glanced at Max, still lying beside the crib. The dog remained motionless, his eyes distant yet alert, his ears twitching slightly at the quiet murmurs around him. We need to find the mother, Officer Daniels said firmly. She's in serious trouble. The officers spread out, questioning the few neighbors still living in the area. Eventually, they found an elderly man leaning on a cane. I remember the young woman who lived there, he said, nodding toward the abandoned house. She always had a big dog with her. Must be him, right? He gestured at Max. Daniels nodded. Did you ever see a baby? The old man hesitated, then sighed. Yeah, a few months back. Then one day she just disappeared. The story was becoming clear. Overwhelmed by hardship, the mother had reached a breaking point, and in her moment of despair, she entrusted her child to the one protector she knew would never fail her. Based on clues from the letter and the neighbor's account, the police widened their search. After several tense hours, they received a report. Someone had seen a young woman wandering aimlessly through a nearby park, looking exhausted and disoriented. When the officers arrived, they spotted her instantly, a frail figure sitting motionless on a bench, hugging herself against the cold. Her eyes were vacant, her face gaunt, her hair tangled and unkempt. She looked lost, completely drained. Officer Daniels approached cautiously, his tone calm but firm. He chose his words carefully. We found a child, he said gently. A dog led us to an abandoned house nearby. Do you know anything about this? The woman didn't react at first, but then, at the mention of the child, her entire body stiffened. Her breath hitched. Her eyes, once empty, suddenly widened, with shock, with fear, and most of all, with hope. Noah, she whispered, her voice cracking. Her hands trembled, tears welled in her eyes. Is it my baby? Son, is he alive? She stammered, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. Her hands flew to her mouth, her entire body shaking with emotion. Officer Daniels exchanged glances with his team. It was clear they had found the right person. With a gentle nod, he reassured her, We found him. Noah is at the hospital, receiving treatment. He's stable, but still under observation. The moment she heard those words, Rachel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. After days of fear, despair, and hopelessness, she finally had a glimmer of hope. The medical team quickly placed her on a stretcher, checking her condition. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Rachel's voice, hoarse with pain, trembled as she spoke. Noah's father abandoned us right after he was born, she said, her eyes filled with sorrow. I tried to hold on, but everything fell apart. We ran out of food, out of money. I had nothing left. Her voice broke and she stared at the ceiling, reliving the darkness that had consumed her life. Then, barely above a whisper, she continued. Max, he was always there for us. He never left my side, or Noah's. A heavy silence filled the ambulance as the officers and medical staff absorbed her words. She took a shuddering breath. When I was too weak to go on, I asked him. I asked Max to take Noah somewhere safe. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, no one spoke. The thought of a dog understanding such a desperate plea, of a loyal companion making an impossible journey to save a child, it defied belief. Yet Max had done just that. As the ambulance pulled up to the hospital, Rachel's hands clenched the blanket over her. Her heart pounded as she was wheeled inside. Despite his exhaustion, Max stood up and followed her. His steps were slow but determined, his sharp eyes never leaving her side. Finally, they reached the pediatric care unit. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside. There, on a small hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV drips, was Noah. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily, his skin no longer a ghostly pale. He was still weak, still fragile, but he was alive. Tears spilled down Rachel's face as she gently placed her trembling hand on his tiny cheek. "Noah, my baby," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. Behind her, at the doorway, Max stood silently, his watchful gaze locked onto the child he had fought to protect. Rachel turned to the German shepherd, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Thank you, Max. You saved my son. You saved my family." The officers stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the profound scene before them. Max was no ordinary dog. He was a guardian, a protector, a silent hero who had fulfilled his mission with unwavering loyalty and love. Rachel was allowed to stay beside Noah as the doctors continued to monitor his condition. Hours passed, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, at last, a miracle. Noah stirred slightly, his tiny fingers twitching as Rachel gently held his hand. Her breath hitched. "Noah," she whispered, her voice fragile with hope. Slowly, his eyelids fluttered open. His gaze, though weak, recognized the familiar warmth of his mother's presence. Tears streamed down Rachel's face. Max, still lying near the doorway, lifted his head. Though his body was exhausted, his ears remained sharp, alert, as if standing guard until the very end. The nurses and doctors, who had witnessed the impossible, couldn't help but smile. One nurse, unable to hold back her admiration, knelt beside Max and gently stroked his head. "You're a real hero, Max. Thanks to you, this little boy is alive." Max wagged his tail slightly, his deep eyes reflecting an understanding far beyond words. Rachel turned to Max, her heart overflowing with emotion. "You saved us, Max," she whispered. "I'll never forget what you've done." Days passed. Noah, once on the brink of death, was growing stronger. The doctors confirmed that he was out of critical condition, his body recovering thanks to the dedicated care of the hospital staff. Meanwhile, social workers stepped in to help Rachel, offering her a chance to rebuild her life. But through it all, one thing remained unchanged: the silent bond between a mother, her child, and the loyal protector who had saved them both. The day of Rachel's discharge arrived on a bright, golden morning. Holding Noah close, she stepped through the hospital doors, her heart filled with both exhaustion and renewed hope. As the warm sunlight touched Noah's delicate face, his tiny eyes blinked open. Then, something miraculous. A small, gentle smile spread across his lips. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. It was his first smile in days. Beside them, Max walked with quiet dignity, his posture steady, his eyes ever watchful. His duty was not over yet. Rachel stopped. She knelt down, running her fingers through Max's fur. Her voice was soft but filled with deep gratitude. "We made it, Max. Because of you. We have a second chance." Word of their incredible journey had spread far and wide. When Rachel and Noah arrived at their new home, they found a world they had never expected. Neighbors, strangers, kind souls, all waiting with gifts, clothes, food, toys for Noah. Some even offered Rachel job opportunities, eager to help her rebuild what she had lost. The first few days were difficult, but this time she wasn't alone. With every passing moment, she saw Noah grow stronger, healthier, happier. One afternoon, she watched him crawl across the floor, his bright, lively eyes filled with wonder. Tears welled in her own eyes as she turned to Max, the hero who had saved them all. She stroked his head gently. "We made it through, Max." Max looked back at her, his deep, wise eyes filled with understanding, as if he already knew. Because Max's story wasn't just about survival. It was about love, loyalty, and sacrifice, the kind that changes destinies forever. This story reminds us, love and loyalty know no bounds. A true hero can come in any form. Hope is never truly lost. What do you think about Max's incredible courage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button to help spread this message of hope. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring story. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you next time. Sparkles.